Jose Chavez Y Chavez wasn't the loudest name in Billy the Kid's circle, but he may have been the most dangerous. While Billy became the headline, Chavez was the quiet operator. Disciplined, calm under fire, and tied to some of the Lincoln County War's most explosive moments. In this video, we'll break down who Chavez really was, how he earned Billy's trust, why lawmen feared him, and how he managed to survive when so many others didn't. Number 1. Who Jose Chavez Y Chavez really was. Jose Chavez Y Chavez wasn't a side character who happened to stand near Billy the Kid. In the Lincoln County war story, he shows up as the kind of man other gunfighters quietly respected and lawmen quietly worried about. He was a Hispano-New Mexican from a region where family networks mattered as much as firearms, and where the law often meant whoever had money, political friends, and a badge that could be used like a weapon. That background is a big part of why Chavez ended up where he did. In New Mexico territory, land disputes, cattle theft accusations, and business rivalries could turn into armed conflict fast, and people learned early that survival depended on reading a situation in seconds. Chavez carried himself differently than the loud outlaws people picture. Accounts describe him as controlled, not showy. He didn't need to dominate a room with talk because his value was practical. He knew the country, he could move without drawing attention, and he didn't fall apart when things got dangerous. Another detail that often gets overlooked is that his name itself, Chavez Y Chavez, reflects Hispanic naming customs and family ties. In the borderlands, those ties weren't just cultural, they were a safety system. Friends of the family could offer a place to sleep, a fresh horse, a warning about a posse on the road, or a quiet introduction to someone who could help. That kind of network made a man harder to catch than a famous fast gun ever could. By the time the Lincoln County War escalated, Chavez already had a reputation as a capable fighter who kept his head. And that calmness under pressure is what separates dangerous from merely violent. It meant he could make decisions while other men were running on adrenaline. It meant he could hold position, cover a retreat, or wait for the right second instead of firing too early. In a conflict where panic got people killed, Chavez's composure made him valuable and intimidating. Number 2. How he became connected to Billy the Kid. Chavez didn't connect with Billy the Kid through romance, adventure, or some Hollywood-style friendship. It was work, and it was war. The Lincoln County War wasn't a clean outlaw versus sheriff story. It was a power fight between rival business factions in Lincoln County, with money and influence pulling local law enforcement in different directions. When John Tunstall, an English-born rancher and businessman, was killed in early 1878, it triggered a chain reaction. His supporters formed the Regulators, a group that claimed legal authority through warrants, but quickly turned into an armed force operating in a place where legality was constantly disputed. Billy the Kid became the most famous Regulator, but he wasn't the only serious one. Chavez joined the same circle, and that's where the connection hardened. Shared danger, shared enemies, shared moments where your life literally depended on the person next to you not freezing. Billy was young, bold, and aggressive, quick to move, quick to shoot, quick to take risks. Chavez stood out because he was steadier. In a group of men who often ran hot, the one who stays cool becomes the one others lean on, especially when plans go wrong. That's how reputations form in real violence. Not from speeches, but from performance under pressure. Chavez likely earned Billy's respect by being reliable in the unglamorous roles, watching the rear, scouting a route, guarding prisoners, holding a position long enough for others to withdraw. Those jobs don't produce dramatic stories, but they decide who survives. And in the Regulator's world, trust was a rare currency. People switched sides. Deputies acted like gunmen. Gunmen claimed they were enforcing the law. In that kind of environment, friend didn't mean a guy you joked with. It meant a guy you believed would not sell you out and would not lose control when the shooting started. Chavez fit that definition, and that's why he ends up remembered as one of Billy's closest and most dangerous allies. Number 3. His role during the Lincoln County War. Jose Chavez Y Chavez is tied to some of the war's hardest moments, and the most famous is the killing of Sheriff William Brady. Brady was aligned with the faction opposed to Tunstall and the Regulators, and he was widely viewed by the Regulators as part of a corrupt system that protected their enemies. In early 1878, Lincoln County was basically a pressure cooker ambushes, counter ambushes, arrests that looked like kidnappings, and legal documents used as cover for revenge. Brady's death became one of the conflict's turning points because it pushed the war into a new phase and intensified the hunt for the Regulators. Chavez was widely reported as being among the men involved in that attack, though details differ depending on the source and the testimony you're looking at. That uncertainty is normal for this era. Witnesses had motives, factions controlled narratives, and fear shaped what people were willing to say out loud. What matters for understanding Chavez is not just whether he fired a specific shot, but why his name kept coming up. His reputation suggested he was exactly the kind of man you would use in a planned hit. Steady hands, quick movement, and no hesitation when the moment arrived. The Brady killing was not remembered as a chaotic bar fight. It was remembered as an intentional strike, carried out in a public space against a high-profile target. That kind of act sends a message, and it also attracts serious consequences. After Brady was killed, authorities pushed harder, and being suspected or accused carried real danger. Chavez's later legal trouble, he was arrested and faced prosecution connected to the Brady case, became part of his legend. The major point here is that he wasn't just around during the Lincoln County War. He was close enough to the center that he ended up linked to actions that changed how law enforcement responded. When a man's name makes it onto wanted lists and court documents connected to a sheriff's killing, that tells you how seriously authorities took him. And, for Billy the Kid, having an ally like that was a force multiplier. Billy's fame created heat, but Chavez's skill made the group more effective. That combination celebrity plus capability made their circle especially dangerous in 1878. Number 4. Why lawmen considered him extremely dangerous. Lawmen didn't fear every outlaw equally. The loud, drunk, unpredictable gunman might cause problems, but he was also easier to predict and easier to trap. Chavez Y Chavez earned a different kind of fear because he was controlled. He didn't advertise himself. He didn't start trouble for entertainment. He didn't need to prove anything in public. That's the profile that makes a posse nervous, because it means the man you're chasing is thinking while you're reacting. Chavez also had natural advantages in New Mexico territory that many outside lawmen didn't. He knew the land, the arroyos, the ridges, the back routes between settlements, the places a horse could drink, the places a man could hide without leaving obvious signs. He understood how sound carried, how dust gave away movement, and how to travel in a way that didn't scream, "I'm running." On top of that, he understood people. In Hispanic communities, he could blend in more easily than a stranger deputy from another county. Family connections and local friendships could provide information faster than any official telegram. That doesn't mean everyone supported him, but it meant he had options. For law enforcement, options are what make a target hard to catch. Another reason Chavez worried them is that he wasn't easily provoked. Many gunfights in the Old West started because men got emotional insults, alcohol, ego. Chavez was known for not playing that game. If he chose to fight, it was because he believed it was necessary, not because he was offended. That makes a man harder to manipulate. Deputies couldn't bait him into exposing himself. They couldn't rely on him to show up at the same saloon every night. And because Chavez was tied to a conflict like the Lincoln County War, where law and crime were tangled, lawmen also faced political risk. Arresting the wrong person or shooting the wrong man could trigger retaliation or embarrass a powerful faction. So Chavez became the kind of figure who created tension on multiple levels: tactical danger in the field, social danger in the community, and political danger in the courthouse. This is why some historians and writers describe him as Billy the Kid's most dangerous friend. Billy brought heat and boldness, but Chavez brought discipline, local knowledge, and the ability to survive the manhunt culture of the late 1870s. When those traits sit next to Billy's willingness to take risks, you get a partnership that could strike fast and then vanish. Exactly the nightmare scenario for lawmen trying to impose order in a territory that wasn't ready to be controlled. Number 5. Killings directly linked to Jose Chavez Y Chavez. When people call Jose Chavez Y Chavez Billy the Kid's most dangerous friend, they're usually reacting to one thing: the pattern of violence that follows his name in the Lincoln County War. Not because he was constantly looking for trouble, but because whenever the regulators needed someone who could handle the ugly jobs without losing control, Chavez was the kind of man you'd trust. The surviving record around the Lincoln County War is messy. Witnesses were scared, newspapers were biased, and enemies had every reason to blame each other. But Chavez shows up repeatedly in the same places where the body count rises. The most serious link is the attack that killed Sheriff William Brady, which pushed Chavez from armed partisan into wanted man in the eyes of territorial authorities. Even when sources disagree about who fired which shot, Chavez is consistently described as being among the gunmen connected to the operation. That matters because it tells you how close he was to the core of Regulator action. Another key detail is how the violence was described. Chavez wasn't remembered as a man who shot wildly or acted like he needed an audience. He was associated with controlled, purposeful use of force ambushes, covering movements, and finishing fights quickly. That's exactly the style lawmen fear most, because it's hard to predict and hard to survive. And there's a big difference between random violence and conflict violence in that era. Many men carried guns, but not many were willing to take part in a targeted strike against a sheriff in broad daylight, knowing the legal and political consequences would be huge. Chavez's reputation suggests he accepted those risks because he believed the conflict demanded it, and because he trusted his ability to get out alive afterward. Another thing often missed is that Chavez didn't build his image by bragging. A lot of Old West reputations were self-marketed. Chavez's wasn't. His reputation spread because other people enemies, witnesses, and lawmen kept repeating the same description: quiet, steady, efficient. In practical terms, that means his violence wasn't theatrical, it was functional. He did what needed to be done, and then he disappeared back into the landscape and the social networks that sheltered him. That's why, even today, historians describe him as one of the most dangerous regulators. Not because he was the loudest killer, but because he seemed to understand the mechanics of survival in violent territory. Strike fast, don't talk, don't linger, and don't give the other side a clean chance at revenge. Number 6. Life after the collapse of the regulators. After the Lincoln County War cooled down and the regulators scattered, Billy the Kid became the lightning rod. He was famous, easy to recognize, and emotionally tied to continuing the fight. Chavez went the opposite direction. He faded on purpose. That choice is one of the most informative parts of his story, because it shows what kind of outlaw he really was. Chavez wasn't addicted to chaos. He wasn't trying to become a legend. He understood that the territory was changing, and that the kind of open faction violence seen in Lincoln County was becoming harder to sustain. Law enforcement coordination improved, the political landscape shifted, and the appetite for informal war shrank. Chavez adapted by lowering his profile, leaning on family and community connections, and avoiding the kind of public behavior that makes a man easy to hunt. He also faced real legal danger. Chavez was arrested and pulled into the court system connected to the Lincoln County killings, including the Brady case. That's where the gap between myth and reality becomes clear. In movies, an outlaw either gets shot in the street or rides off forever. In real history, courts, appeals, local politics, and unreliable witnesses often decided who lived and who died. Chavez avoided execution and avoided spending the rest of his life locked away, and that outcome wasn't luck alone. It reflected how complicated the evidence was, how difficult it was to get consistent testimony in a terror-filled county, and how many people had incentives to distort the story. It also reflected Chavez's own survival instincts. He didn't keep provoking authorities the way Billy did. He didn't keep placing himself at the center of headlines. He adjusted his behavior to the new reality. The more visible you are, the easier you are to destroy. Over time, Chavez lived long enough to see the Old West become something else. More settled, more bureaucratic, less tolerant of roaming armed factions. That long life is part of what makes him so interesting. It suggests he was capable of switching gears, of stepping away from a violent identity once it stopped being useful. And for viewers, that's a powerful lesson about the real West. The men who survived weren't always the fastest. They were often the ones who knew when to stop. Number 7. Why he was more dangerous than Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid had speed, nerve, and a kind of reckless confidence that made him famous. Chavez Y Chavez had something more threatening to lawmen: discipline. If you're a sheriff or a deputy in 1878 New Mexico territory, the man you fear most isn't necessarily the one who shoots first. It's the one who thinks ahead. Billy drew attention everywhere he went. He became a moving headline. Chavez, by contrast, could operate without lighting up the room. He didn't need fame, and he didn't rely on intimidation alone. That changes everything. A famous outlaw can be tracked through gossip. A quiet one can't. Billy was also emotionally reactive. His choices were sometimes driven by loyalty, anger, or the moment. Chavez, based on the way he's described in accounts, was more likely to move with a plan. Choose terrain, pick timing, avoid unnecessary exposure, and withdraw when the objective is done. That's why some historians argue Chavez was more dangerous in a practical sense. Billy was the brand. Chavez was the capability. In violent group dynamics, that combination is lethal. Billy could rally men and create momentum, but Chavez could execute tasks with fewer mistakes. Another difference is predictability. Billy's behavior, over time, became readable to experienced lawmen. He took risks, he returned to familiar circles, and he sometimes pushed his luck. Chavez was harder to profile because he didn't perform. He didn't escalate just to prove toughness. He didn't announce his next move. And he had another advantage Billy didn't have to the same extent: deeper local integration. Chavez's family ties and cultural familiarity in New Mexico could offer shelter, information, and plausible cover. That kind of support network can make a man practically invisible if he's careful. So, when people call him Billy the Kid's most dangerous friend, they're pointing to a specific idea. Chavez was the kind of ally who made Billy's world more effective and more survivable. He could cover retreats, enforce decisions, and move through territory without leaving a trail of drama. Billy the Kid became the symbol of outlaw conflict. Chavez represented the operational side, the quiet competence that keeps a violent group alive longer than it should. Number 8. His place in Old West history. Chavez Y Chavez sits in a strange spot in Old West history. He was close enough to major events to matter, but he didn't become a pop culture icon the way Billy did. That's partly because Chavez survived and avoided the kind of dramatic public ending that turns a man into a legend. It's also because early Old West storytelling often centered Anglo heroes and villains, while Hispano figures were pushed to the margins or simplified into stereotypes. Chavez breaks that pattern if you look closely. He forces you to see the Lincoln County War as it really was: a tangled conflict involving business power, local politics, ethnic tension, land issues, and law enforcement that often acted like another faction. Chavez's story also shows how history gets built from imperfect materials. We have court records, newspaper reports, and later recollections, each with bias, gaps, and contradictions. That's why his exact role in certain killings remains debated, but the broader picture stays consistent. He was a trusted regulator, repeatedly linked to the war's most serious violence, feared by opponents, and skilled enough to outlast the chaos. That makes him valuable for understanding the adult reality behind the Wild West image. Not just gunfights, but consequences. Not just reputation, but strategy. Not just a single showdown, but decades of living with what you did and what people believed you did. In the end, Chavez is remembered not because he had the loudest legend, but because he represents a real type of frontier figure. The capable, disciplined fighter who can step into a violent conflict, survive it, and then quietly adapt as the frontier closes. And that's why calling him Billy the Kid's most dangerous friend isn't just clickbait. It's a way of saying that Billy's most effective ally wasn't necessarily the flashiest gunman. It was the one who stayed calm, moved smart, and understood how to survive both the bullets and the aftermath.